I pretended to be paralyzed for 4 months to catch my wife trying to murder me. Every billionaire asks themselves the same thing. Would she still love me if I had nothing? So when me and my wife got into a car accident, I knew exactly what to do. I texted my assistant Layla from the ambulance. Code Silver. She knew what that meant. By the time we reached my private hospital wing, she'd assembled the team. 50 paid actors were ready to help me pretend I was a vegetable. The head of neurology cost $2 million and sold the diagnosis perfectly. Every nurse signed NDAs worth their mortgages. The doctor announced complete paralysis, and Elena's tears broke my heart. She was an angel. She'd fluff my pillows, stroke my hair, and whisper loving words. But the second we were alone, her face went cold. Vegetables shouldn't take this long to die, she'd mutter, then practice her concerned face in the mirror. She called her ex Dean while standing over me. The accident worked perfectly. Prenups void for disability. She'd take crying selfies for Instagram, checking follower counts between fake tears. My nurse was actually my head of security, documenting everything. She performed grief like an actress when my mother visited, then immediately called her lawyer. How much longer until I can pull the plug legally? My mother, who I'd briefed, played the concerned mother-in-law perfectly, while Elena counted days on her calendar, circling dates in red. Week 3 brought Rick. My best friend since we were 12 walked into my room, and Elena locked the door. He's completely gone, she said, snapping fingers in my face, shining phone lights in my eyes. Watch this. She slapped me hard across the face. Then again. Rick laughed nervously until she grabbed his hand and put it on her breast. He can't feel anything. We could make love right here. Rick pulled back, but she pushed harder. Come on. It's nothing we haven't done before. My security team watched through hidden cameras as she pulled Rick onto my bed. Imagine inheriting his empire through our kid, she whispered, while unzipping his pants 2 feet from my paralyzed body. Rick's resistance crumbled when she mentioned the billions. They made love in my bed while I lay there with my eyes covered by a blindfold that I could see out of. My lawyers wanted to end it, but Blake said, without attempted murder on tape, she walks with half your fortune. We need her actually trying to kill you. Over the next 3 months, she escalated. She got me declared incompetent using my paid experts. My forensic accountant tracked 40 million flowing offshore while she practiced eulogies. He was the love of my life, she'd rehearse, adding tears on cue. Rick visited daily now for their scheduled sessions. Our kid's inheriting everything, he'd say while she rode him, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. She'd describe my death during intimacy. First the facility, then a little morphine accident. The pregnancy test came back positive week 16. She waved it in my face. This is your friend's baby, but who's asking for DNA? She'd research untraceable poisons on my laptop while sitting on my legs. Paralyzed vegetables don't need passwords, she'd say, transferring another $1 million. She brought men home, not just Rick anymore. Dean, her trainer, strangers from bars. She'd fuck them in our bed while describing my helplessness. He watches everything but can't do shit, she'd tell them, and they'd laugh while using my paralyzed body as a footrest. Month 4 brought the breakthrough. She met with the hospice consultant who explained morphine doses for comfort care. Elena took detailed notes about injection sites and lethal amounts. Then she booked our vow renewal at my Napa estate, inviting 500 guests to watch her marry a vegetable. Till death do us part won't take long, she told Rick, while trying on the $100,000 dress. She'd eat elaborate dinners on my chest, deliberately spilling wine on my face. Vegetables don't need dignity, she'd say, taking photos for her private collection. The night before our wedding, she called Dean. I've got 15 milligrams of morphine ready, between his toes where nobody checks. 20 minutes after injection, natural death for someone in his condition. I'll do it during the reception when everyone's distracted. She hung up and dressed me like a corpse. Even dead, you'll look good in photos, she said, straightening my tie with fingers that had signed my death warrant. She kissed my forehead with Arctic lips. Then she showed Rick the syringe she'd hidden in her wedding purse. The second her car cleared the gates, I sat up. Tomorrow she thinks she's murdering a vegetable at our vow renewal. Instead, she's walking into her own funeral. Security has every angle covered. I sat up the second Elena's taillights disappeared past the gate. Layla walked through the door before I could stretch my neck. Irving Appleby followed with 3 security guys carrying hard drives and tablets. Barrett Gibson came last with a leather folder thick with documents. Irving set up a laptop on the nightstand and pulled up camera feeds showing every angle of Elena's departure. The audio files were already organized by date, with timestamps marking every conversation about murder. Barrett opened his folder and showed me the criminal complaint ready to file with the DA's office. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, theft. Crispin McCoy had signed off on arrest warrants that just needed Elena to actually try the injection before they became active. Melissa Appleby had frozen the offshore accounts 3 hours ago using emergency court orders. Elena thought she had 43 million hidden, but it was all locked down waiting for asset seizure. The team ran through the final checklist while I headed to the bathroom. 4 months of lying still had done more damage than I expected, even with the secret physical therapy. My muscles worked, but everything felt stiff and strange. The shower helped wash away the hospital smell and the feeling of being helpless. I stood under hot water for 20 minutes working out the tension in my shoulders. Barrett knocked and told me Crispin was positioned at the courthouse ready to move. Melissa confirmed every financial trap was set. The dress clothes Elena had picked out were still hanging in the closet. Black suit like I was already dead. I put on my actual wedding suit instead. Navy blue, custom tailored, the one I wore when I married her 5 years ago before I knew what she was. Irving came in while I was fixing my tie and pulled up the venue security grid on his tablet. 40 cameras hidden in flower arrangements, ceiling fixtures and decorative panels. Microphones in Elena's bouquet would catch every word she said. Her purse had a tracker and a camera pointing up at her face. 500 guests would be watched by 20 plainclothes security scattered through the crowd. The instant Elena reached for that syringe, 6 people would move to intercept. Irving showed me the sight lines and backup positions. Barrett had coordinated with Crispin to have uniformed officers outside in unmarked cars. My mother arrived 2 hours before the ceremony. She walked into my bedroom and saw me standing there fully dressed and healthy. Her face crumpled and she grabbed me in a hug that hurt my ribs. She cried for 5 minutes while I held her. She kept saying she was sorry for not stopping it sooner. I told her the performance had to be complete, or Elena would have suspected. She pulled back and wiped her eyes and said watching Elena abuse me while she pretended to care was worse than anything she'd experienced. But she understood why total authenticity mattered. The evidence needed to be perfect. Layla came in with her tablet showing Elena's morning timeline. 6 a.m. wake up with a call to Rick confirming the plan. 7:30 practicing her sad widow face in the bathroom mirror. 8:15 checking the morphine dosage calculations for the 3rd time like she was cramming for a test. 9 a.m. final purse check to make sure the syringe was accessible. 10 a.m. hair and makeup appointment. 11 a.m. she'd be arriving at the venue. Everything was proceeding exactly as Elena had planned, except I wasn't actually paralyzed anymore. Guests started showing up at noon. Old friends, business associates, distant relatives who thought they were attending a touching vow renewal ceremony. Barrett positioned himself 3 rows from the front, with Crispin sitting next to him, dressed like a cousin nobody remembered, both of them ready to move fast. Irving confirmed all cameras were recording. The security team spread through the crowd looking like regular guests. Nobody knew they were attending a trap instead of a wedding. The venue coordinator wheeled me to the altar at 1:45. I kept my eyes closed and my body completely limp. The wheelchair felt different now that I was choosing to sit in it. Irving's voice came through the tiny earpiece hidden in my ear canal. Elena had just pulled up. She was checking her makeup in the car. Her hand went to her purse. She was confirming the syringe was there. She took 3 deep breaths like an actress preparing for a performance. Then she got out and walked toward the venue entrance. The ceremony music started at 2 p.m. exactly. I heard Elena's heels clicking on the stone path. She came up behind my wheelchair and put her hands on the handles. Her performance started immediately. I heard her voice breaking as she spoke to the officiant about how meaningful this renewal was. Several guests were already crying at her dedication. She wheeled me down the aisle slowly. Her hand rested on my shoulder, the same hand that had slapped my face hard enough to make my ears ring. I used everything I had learned over 4 months to stay completely limp. My breathing stayed shallow and regular. My face showed nothing. The officiant began the ceremony, and Elena delivered her prepared speech. She talked about eternal love and staying devoted through sickness and health. Her voice broke at perfect moments. I watched through barely opened eyes as she positioned herself next to my wheelchair. She was setting up access to my feet, the injection site she'd chosen, between my toes where nobody would check. The officiant asked if she took me as her husband, and she said yes, with tears streaming down her face. The ceremony concluded, and she leaned down to kiss my forehead. Those cold lips touched my skin one last time. Then she grabbed the wheelchair handles and started pushing me toward the reception area, the champagne toast, where she planned to commit murder while everyone was distracted. Irving confirmed through my earpiece that all cameras were recording. Crispin had his hand on the arrest warrant in his jacket pocket. Barrett was moving into position. Elena wheeled me to a spot near the back of the reception space exactly where she'd planned, somewhere she could access me during the celebration. I was ready to end 4 months of the most elaborate performance of my life. Elena wheels me to a spot near the back corner of the reception tent, where white tablecloths cover round tables and champagne glasses wait on silver trays. She parks the wheelchair at an angle that gives her access to my feet while keeping me away from the main crowd. I watch through barely open eyes as she smooths her wedding dress and walks toward the first group of guests. Her face transforms into perfect grief, mixed with joy, as an older couple hugs her and tells her how brave she is. She touches her heart and dabs at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from somewhere. I count the seconds between when she checks her watch. 45 seconds pass before she glances at her wrist again. Irving's voice comes through my earpiece, confirming all cameras are recording her movements. She works the room like a professional actress, making sure every guest sees her devoted wife performance. She accepts hugs and whispers and sympathetic touches on her arm. Every few minutes, her eyes dart to the wheelchair to confirm I'm still sitting there helpless. Barrett stands 3 tables away, pretending to look at his phone, but I know he's watching Elena track her murder timeline. The guests flow around the reception space, drinking champagne and eating appetizers from passing trays. Nobody knows they're attending a trap instead of a celebration. Elena moves from group to group, and her hand keeps going to her purse where the syringe waits hidden in a side pocket. She checks her watch again. 30 seconds this time. The ceremony took longer than she planned, and now she's getting nervous about her timeline. Rick walks through the entrance at 2:45, and Elena's entire face changes in a way I've never seen before. Her eyes light up, and her mouth forms a genuine smile that reaches all the way to her cheeks. She moves toward him fast, and he kisses her on the mouth, not the cheek like you'd expect at someone else's wedding. His hand drops to her stomach in a quick touch that looks casual, but I know what it means. He's checking on their baby, the child they think will inherit everything I own. Barrett's hand lands on my shoulder and squeezes once. The signal means wait. Don't move yet. Let her make the attempt. Rick stays close to Elena as she introduces him to guests as my best friend since childhood. They laugh together at something someone says, and his hand rests on the small of her back. I watch them through my eyelashes and remember when Rick and I were 12 building a treehouse in my backyard. The memory tastes like metal in my mouth. Elena checks her watch again and says something to Rick that makes him nod. She excuses herself from the conversation and walks toward the bathroom tent they set up near the main entrance. Irving's voice confirms through my earpiece that she just entered the bathroom. Melissa's voice comes next, saying, "This is it." Elena's removing the syringe from her purse. She's checking the dosage markings on the side. She's practicing the injection angle with her thumb on the plunger. My heart pounds against my ribs, but I keep my breathing steady and shallow. 4 months of practice makes the paralyzed act automatic now. Barrett's hand squeezes my shoulder again. Irving confirms Elena's leaving the bathroom with the syringe concealed in her right palm. She comes back into the reception tent smiling at guests and accepting more congratulations about our beautiful ceremony. The syringe stays hidden in her hand, pressed against her leg as she walks. Rick moves into position near my wheelchair without being obvious about it. He stands at an angle that blocks the sightline from most of the guests. They planned this part carefully in their phone calls that my security team recorded. Elena reaches my wheelchair and kneels down beside me like a concerned wife, checking on her invalid husband. Her left hand touches the blanket covering my legs, while her right hand moves toward my foot. I can see the syringe now positioned between her fingers, exactly like she practiced. She pulls the blanket back slightly to expose my ankle. Her fingers find the space between my toes where she planned to inject. The needle touches my skin, and I feel the cold metal point press against me. My eyes snap open fully, and my hand shoots out to grab her wrist with perfect strength. I look directly into her face and say clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear me speak for the first time in 4 months. Her face goes through 3 expressions in the space of maybe 2 seconds. First shock, because vegetables don't grab wrists. Then confusion, because nothing makes sense anymore. Then horror, as she understands what just happened. I stand up from the wheelchair using muscles that work perfectly fine and have been working fine this whole time. The reception tent goes completely silent as 500 guests stop talking and turn to watch me standing there holding my wife's wrist. She's holding a syringe full of morphine that was supposed to kill me in 20 minutes. Barrett signals to Crispin, who starts moving toward us from his position near the bar. Elena tries to drop the syringe, but I keep my grip tight on her wrist. Irving and 2 security team members appear from different directions, and Irving takes the syringe carefully using a clear evidence bag. Crispin reaches us and announces in a voice that carries across the tent that he's the district attorney, and Elena is under arrest for attempted murder. Rick tries to run toward the exit, but security blocks every door. My mother steps forward from where she was standing with a group of her friends. She tells the guests in a calm voice that they just witnessed the prevention of a murder. I address the crowd in a steady voice, explaining that for 4 months, I pretended to be paralyzed to document my wife's true intentions. The security team starts displaying video footage on screens they set up around the tent. The guests watch Elena on the screens talking to Rick about inheriting my empire through their baby. They watch her researching poison doses on my laptop. They watch her meeting with the hospice consultant about morphine protocols. They watch her calling Dean to confirm she had 15 milligrams ready for injection. The screens show Elena having sex with Rick in my bed while I lay there supposedly paralyzed 2 feet away. They show her slapping my face and laughing about vegetables not needing dignity. Guest faces turn from shock to disgust as they watch 4 months of documented betrayal play out on multiple screens. Elena starts screaming that I can't prove anything, even though she's surrounded by cameras and witnesses and still holding the syringe that has her fingerprints all over it. Crispin reads her rights from a card he pulls from his jacket pocket. 2 officers put handcuffs on her wrists, and she's still wearing the $100,000 wedding dress she bought to wear while murdering me. Rick gets handcuffed too, and Crispin announces conspiracy to commit murder charges against him. The guests react in waves, starting from the people closest to the wheelchair. Some of them scream. Others start crying. An older man near the back bends over and throws up his champagne and appetizers onto the grass. A woman faints, and 2 people catch her before she hits the ground. My mother takes control by raising her voice and asking everyone to please remain here, because police will need statements from all witnesses. Barrett's legal team starts moving through the crowd with tablets and recording devices to process 500 witness accounts. Elena and Rick get walked toward separate police vehicles that pulled up outside the tent. Elena's screaming about her lawyer and her rights while still wearing her wedding dress with the train dragging through the grass. Rick stays quiet with his head down as they put him in the back of a different car. The vehicles drive away with lights flashing, and I'm left standing in the middle of my vow renewal reception that turned into the most public arrest anyone here will ever witness. Barrett's team spends the next hour taking statements from guests who watched the whole thing happen. I sit in a private room they set up away from the main tent and wait for the investigators to finish processing the scene. Crispin brings in 2 detectives and a recording device around 4 in the afternoon. They ask me to walk them through everything from the beginning, and I start with the car accident 4 months ago. I explain the code silver text to Layla and how we assembled 50 paid actors within hours. The detectives take notes while I describe every detail of Elena's behavior during my fake paralysis. I show them timestamps for when she slapped me, when she had sex with Rick in my bed, when she researched poison doses on my laptop. The head detective keeps shaking his head like he can't believe what he's hearing. I walk them through the financial theft that Melissa documented, 40 million moving to offshore accounts in careful increments. I explain how Elena got me declared incompetent, using the same doctors I paid to fake my diagnosis. The pregnancy comes up, and I describe how she waved the positive test in my face while telling me it was Rick's baby. I detail the hospice consultant meeting where Elena took notes about lethal morphine doses. The investigators ask about the vow renewal planning, and I explain how she booked everything while planning to kill me during the reception. I show them the recording of her phone call to Dean, confirming she had 15 milligrams ready for injection between my toes. 6 hours pass while I give them every piece of evidence we collected. Crispin tells the detectives this is the most completely documented attempted murder case he's ever seen. The evidence is so strong that conviction is basically guaranteed. The detectives agree and start packing up their recording equipment. By the time we finish, it's almost 10 at night, and I'm exhausted from reliving 4 months of abuse in one sitting. Barrett pulls me aside and says the story already broke nationally because you can't arrest someone at their vow renewal with 500 witnesses without it hitting the news. His PR team put out a statement an hour ago confirming the basic facts while trying to protect my privacy. I know that's impossible now because this whole thing was too public and too crazy for anyone to ignore. Barrett shows me his phone, and there are already articles on major news sites with headlines about the billionaire who faked paralysis to catch his wife planning murder. Some articles paint me as a genius who protected himself. Others suggest I'm some kind of sociopath who enjoyed watching my wife betray me for 4 months. Barrett tells me to avoid all media and let the evidence speak for itself. I agree, because I don't want to explain this to reporters who weren't there. My life will never be private again after this, and I know it. The wedding venue staff starts breaking down the tent and cleaning up while police finish their work. Layla finds me around 11 and says she's taking me home. I realize I haven't been to my actual bedroom in 4 months because I spent all that time in the hospital wing. We drive through the gates, and I see photographers already camped outside. Security keeps them back while we pull into the garage. Layla walks me upstairs to my real bedroom, and I feel strange being in this space again after so long. She checks all the security systems and tells me to get some sleep. I collapse into bed and don't wake up for 16 hours straight. Security monitors all the entrances while I sleep harder than I have in months. When I finally wake up the next afternoon, my phone has hundreds of messages from people I haven't talked to in years. Everyone suddenly wants to check on me now that the drama is public knowledge. Old friends from college, distant relatives, business contacts I barely remember. Most of the messages say the same things about being shocked and asking if I'm okay. A few people admit they never liked Elena, but couldn't explain why. I don't respond to any of them because I'm not ready to have those conversations yet. Barrett calls me around 3 in the afternoon and says Rick's family contacted him that morning begging for a meeting. They claim they had no idea about Rick's involvement and want to understand what happened to their son. I tell Barrett I refuse all contact with them because I'm not ready to hear excuses. Watching my best friend since we were 12 betray me was somehow worse than Elena's calculated cruelty. At least Elena married me for money, so her betrayal made sense in a twisted way. Rick threw away decades of friendship for a chance at billions and a baby that wasn't even planned. Barrett says he'll tell them I'm not interested in meeting. He mentions that Elena's lawyer tried to negotiate bail this morning, but Crispin argued she's a flight risk. She has $40 million in offshore accounts and resources that could help her disappear if she makes bail. The judge agreed, and Elena stays in county jail while they process her case. Rick made bail through his parents, who took out a mortgage on their house. I feel some satisfaction knowing Elena is experiencing powerlessness for the first time in her life. She's sitting in a cell wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes. She can't manipulate anyone or play her victim role. She's just another inmate waiting for trial. Barrett says the bail decision was the right call because Elena would absolutely run if given the chance. Over the next few days, Melissa works on completing the financial analysis of everything Elena stole. She presents her findings to me and Barrett in a conference room at his office. Elena took $43 million over 4 months through a complex network of shell companies and offshore transfers. Melissa tracked every transaction and found patterns showing Elena had been setting this up for at least a year before the car accident. She'd created the shell companies months before we even got in that car. Barrett files civil suits to recover everything plus damages. The evidence is so clear that we'll get most of it back eventually. Learning she'd been planning this for over a year hits different from thinking it started with the accident. She married me already planning to steal from me and probably kill me. The whole relationship was a setup from the beginning. The investigation continues, and Crispin calls Barrett with new information about the car accident. They brought in a mechanic who examined what was left of my car and found evidence someone tampered with the brakes. Elena had paid someone to cut the brake lines, planning to kill me in what would look like an accident. When I survived, she had to switch to the long-term murder plan instead. Crispin adds attempted vehicular homicide to the charges against Elena. Her potential sentence just went from 20 years to life in prison. Barrett says this proves everything was premeditated from the start. She wanted me dead one way or another, and the car accident was supposed to be the easy solution. The brake tampering evidence makes the whole case even stronger. A few days later, Dean contacts Barrett offering to testify against Elena. He claims Elena discussed getting rid of me months before the accident, though he says he thought she meant divorce. His testimony helps establish premeditation and planning, which strengthens the case significantly. Dean is trying to distance himself from any conspiracy charges by cooperating. Barrett thinks Dean probably knew more than he's admitting, but his testimony is valuable anyway. Crispin agrees to meet with Dean and get his statement on record. I don't care about Dean's motivations because I just want Elena convicted. After 2 weeks of dealing with investigators and lawyers, I decide to go back to my office. I haven't been there in 4 months, and I need to see how the company handled my absence. Layla drives me downtown, and we take the private elevator up to the executive floor. My team treats me like I'm returning from war when I walk in. Everyone wants to shake my hand and tell me how glad they are that I'm safe. Layla briefs me on business operations, and everything continued smoothly during my absence. The quarterly numbers are actually up from last year. I realize the company never needed me present every day the way I thought it did. My executives are capable of running things without me micromanaging. That's both reassuring and a little humbling. Barrett calls me back to his office the next week to discuss the pregnancy complication. California law gives children certain rights regardless of how they were conceived. Elena's baby might have claims to my estate if she can successfully argue we were married when she got pregnant. The timing is tricky because we were legally married during her affair with Rick. Barrett warns me that Rick's baby could inherit from me unless we invalidate the marriage based on fraud and criminal actions. We start legal proceedings immediately to get the marriage voided. Barrett files motions arguing that Elena's criminal conduct and fraudulent intentions void the marriage contract. The pregnancy adds a whole new layer of legal complexity I didn't anticipate. I never thought I'd be fighting to make sure my best friend's baby with my wife doesn't inherit my fortune. Barrett assures me the fraud case is strong enough to invalidate everything, but it will take time to work through the courts. Elena's lawyer will fight the invalidation because that baby is her last chance at accessing my money. I sign all the paperwork Barrett puts in front of me and try not to think about how twisted this whole situation has become. 3 weeks pass in a blur of legal meetings and paperwork before Barrett calls me into his office with news about Elena's lawyer. They want a plea deal. 20 years for attempted murder instead of risking life in prison at trial. Barrett slides the formal offer across his desk, and I stare at the numbers like they're written in a foreign language. Crispin sits in the corner chair and explains that 20 years is a good deal from the prosecution's perspective because it guarantees conviction without the risk of jury sympathy. Some juries see a crying woman and forget about the syringe full of morphine. I pick up the paper and set it back down 3 times while they wait for my answer. Part of me wants to watch Elena squirm on the witness stand while prosecutors play every recording of her planning my death. The other part just wants this finished, so I can stop reliving those 4 months every time I see her lawyer's name in my inbox. Barrett leans forward and asks what I want to do, and I realize I don't actually know. The satisfaction of a trial might feel good for a few weeks, but 20 guaranteed years means she's definitely locked away. I sign the paper agreeing to support the plea deal, and Barrett nods like I made the right choice, even though neither of us knows if that's true. Barrett insists I need to see a therapist before I leave his office that day. He's got someone already lined up and hands me an address for an appointment the next morning. I want to argue, but the nightmares started a few days ago, so I take the card and show up at the therapist's office at 9. She's older with gray hair and kind eyes, and she doesn't waste time with small talk. She asks me to describe the 4 months, and I give her the basic facts without much detail. She stops me when I get to the part about Elena slapping me and asks how I managed to stay still through that. I tell her I just did, and she shakes her head. She explains that staying motionless while someone abuses you requires something called dissociation, where your brain disconnects from your body to protect itself. The problem is that dissociation doesn't just turn off when the danger ends. Your brain learns that disconnecting keeps you safe and starts doing it automatically, even when you don't need it anymore. She says, the nightmares are my brain trying to process trauma it couldn't handle in real time. In the dreams, I'm actually paralyzed, and Elena comes with the syringe, and I can't move or scream or do anything except wait for the needle. I wake up frozen in bed, unable to move for several seconds until my brain remembers the paralysis was fake. The therapist schedules me for twice a week, and I agree because the nightmares are getting worse, not better. Rick's lawyer contacts Barrett 2 days after Elena's plea offer with a separate deal. Barrett calls me from his car, and I can hear the disgust in his voice as he explains Rick's defense strategy. Rick claims Elena manipulated him, and he didn't fully understand the murder plan. His lawyer argues Rick was a victim of Elena's schemes just like me. Barrett asks if I want to hear the recorded conversations where Rick explicitly discussed inheriting my wealth through his baby with Elena, and I say no, because I already know what's on those recordings. Rick talked about billions while having sex in my bed 2 feet from my supposedly paralyzed body. He knew exactly what he was doing, and his lawyer's manipulation defense is pathetic. Crispin rejects the offer within an hour, and Barrett tells me Rick will probably end up with 15 to 20 years for conspiracy and accessory charges. I feel nothing when Barrett gives me this update. Rick stopped being my friend the moment he touched Elena, and no plea deal changes that fact. My mother calls and asks if she can come over that evening. She sounds tired on the phone, and I know something's wrong before she even arrives. She sits on my couch and admits she's been seeing her own therapist twice a week since the vow renewal. Watching Elena abuse me while pretending to be a concerned mother damaged something in her she can't quite explain. She had to act supportive while Elena counted days until my death and smile at Elena's performance while knowing every word was a lie. My mother says she's proud I protected myself, but she wishes I'd found a way that didn't require 4 months of torture for both of us. She starts crying, and I realize this is the first honest conversation we've had since I sat up from that wheelchair. The deception created this weird intimacy between us, where we shared something horrible that nobody else can understand. We both watched Elena's true nature emerge, and had to stay silent while she planned murder. My mother says her therapist is helping her process the anger she feels about what I put us both through, even though she knows why I did it. I apologize for involving her, and she waves it off, but I can see the damage in her eyes. Some things can't be fixed with apologies. The media situation explodes the next week when someone leaks were selected recordings of Elena discussing the murder plan. I'm eating breakfast when Layla calls and tells me to avoid all news sites and social media for the foreseeable future. Too late, because I already opened my phone and saw my face on every major outlet. The recordings turn Elena into a national villain and me into either a genius who outsmarted a killer or a sociopath who tortured his wife for 4 months, depending on which outlet you read. Half the country thinks I'm a hero for exposing Elena's true nature. The other half thinks I'm sick for letting the abuse continue when I could have ended it earlier. Barrett calls an hour later and advises me to avoid all media and let the evidence speak for itself. Any statement I make will just feed the circus and give outlets more material to twist into whatever narrative sells. I delete my social media apps and stop reading news sites but I still hear about it from everyone who calls. My assistant shows me a poll where 60% of respondents support my actions and 40% think I'm as bad as Elena. I throw my phone across the room, and Layla quietly picks it up and doesn't mention the cracked screen. Melissa calls with an update on the offshore account recovery the same week the media circus peaks. She managed to freeze 41 of the 43 million Elena stole, but 2 million disappeared into some cryptocurrency that may never be recovered. Elena's lawyer immediately files a motion arguing she needs those frozen funds for her defense. Barrett laughs when he forwards me the motion, because the argument is basically that Elena should be allowed to use stolen money to defend herself against theft charges. The judge rules within 2 days that stolen assets cannot be used for legal defense, and Elena's accounts remain frozen. Melissa explains this means Elena will have a public defender instead of the expensive legal team she planned to hire with my money. The irony isn't lost on anyone that Elena will face attempted murder charges with the same quality of defense she thought poor people deserved. Barrett says this significantly improves our chances at trial if the plea deal falls through because public defenders are overworked and under-resourced compared to the prosecution team Crispin assembled. I drive out to the private hospital wing the next morning and stand in the parking lot staring at the building where I spent 4 months being abused. The medical facility cost $12 million to build and equip, but I can't stand knowing it exists with all those memories embedded in the walls. I call a demolition company and tell them I want the entire structure gone within a month. The crew supervisor thinks I'm crazy when he arrives for the estimate and sees a pristine medical facility that's barely a year old. I don't explain, and he doesn't ask questions when I authorize payment for immediate demolition. Layla tries to talk me out of it by explaining the facility's value, but I need it gone more than I need $12 million. Watching the wrecking ball hit that building 2 weeks later provides more satisfaction than any therapy session. The construction crew hauls away the rubble and plants grass where the hospital wing stood, and I can finally drive past that spot without feeling sick. Dean provides his testimony to investigators the same week the demolition finishes. Barrett forwards me the transcript, and I read it in my car before going into the office. Dean admits Elena showed him the prenup years ago during their relationship and discussed how disability would void the agreement and give her access to my full wealth. He claims he thought she was just complaining about the prenup's terms and didn't realize she was planning anything. The investigators don't believe his ignorance act, but his testimony proves the car accident was always meant to either kill me or disable me. The brake tampering wasn't some panicked backup plan after I survived. Elena researched the prenup loopholes years before the accident and planned the whole thing. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Crispin adds this testimony to his case file and tells Barrett it makes the premeditation charges solid. Elena didn't snap and try to kill me in a moment of passion. She spent years planning how to access my wealth through my death or disability. 6 weeks after the arrest, Crispin presents the complete case to a grand jury for indictment. Barrett and I sit in his office while Crispin texts updates throughout the day. The grand jury indicts Elena on attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, vehicular assault, theft, fraud, and 6 other charges. Rick receives conspiracy charges and accessory to attempted murder. Both face decades in prison even with plea deals. Crispin calls Barrett after the indictment, and they discuss trial timelines and witness lists while I sit there feeling nothing. The charges are exactly what we expected, and the evidence is overwhelming, but none of it changes the fact that I spent 4 months being tortured by someone I loved. Legal victories don't erase trauma, and indictments don't give me back the trust I lost. Elena's lawyer sends a letter the next week saying she wants to write me an apology as part of a potential plea negotiation. Barrett brings the letter to my office and asks if I want to read it before he responds. I tell him to burn it without showing me. I don't want her words or her excuses, and any apology at this point is just strategy for sentencing reduction. Barrett nods and takes the letter back, and I never ask what happened to it. Elena had 4 months to apologize while she was planning my murder, and she spent that time having sex with my best friend in my bed instead. Her words mean nothing now that she's facing prison time. The only thing I want from Elena is distance, and the legal system is providing that whether she apologizes or not. Rick's parents showed up at my office 2 days after I told Barrett to refuse their meeting request. Security called me from the lobby saying they were demanding to see me and wouldn't leave without answers. I told security to escort them out, but they made it to my floor before anyone could stop them. Rick's mother pushed past my assistant and burst into my office while his father stood in the doorway looking broken. She started screaming that I destroyed her son's life and set him up to take the fall for my sick game. Her face was red, and spit flew from her mouth as she called me a manipulator who orchestrated everything to frame Rick. Security grabbed her arms, but she kept shouting that Rick was a good boy who made one mistake and I ruined him because I couldn't accept that Elena never loved me. His father just stood there crying and shaking his head while two security guards dragged his wife backward toward the elevators. She screamed that I was the real criminal, and Rick was just a victim of my twisted plan all the way down the hall until the elevator doors closed. Layla found me 20 minutes later still sitting at my desk with my hands shaking. She didn't say anything, just sat in the chair across from me while I stared at the wall. Part of me knew Rick's mother was right, even though Rick made his own choices. I did set up an elaborate trap, and Rick walked into it, but he walked in willingly when he decided to sleep with my wife in my bed. Layla eventually asked if I wanted to cancel my afternoon meetings, and I said no, because stopping would mean admitting that the confrontation affected me. The therapist's office became my weekly routine starting that month. She had kind eyes and never judged when I described the 4 months of abuse I endured while pretending to be paralyzed. During our 4th session, she explained that I was experiencing complex trauma from sustained abuse, combined with betrayal by the two people I trusted most. Recovery would take years, not months, and she warned me that I'd struggle with trust in all future relationships. The diagnosis made sense, but hearing it out loud felt like Elena won even though she was sitting in jail awaiting trial. She succeeded in damaging me permanently, despite my careful planning and complete documentation. The therapist asked if I thought the deception was worth it, and I couldn't answer because I didn't know anymore. I protected my wealth and proved Elena's intentions, but the cost was 4 months of torture that left scars I'd carry forever. She said that was a normal reaction, and part of processing trauma was accepting that some victories come with permanent costs. I paid her $300 for that session and drove home feeling more broken than before I arrived. 3 months after the arrest, Barrett called to say Elena's lawyer reached out about a plea deal. She would accept 25 years for attempted murder and related charges in exchange for avoiding trial and guaranteed conviction. Crispin recommended I accept because trials are unpredictable, and 25 years was significant time for someone Elena's age. Rick's lawyer made a similar offer the same week, 15 years for conspiracy and accessory charges with admission of guilt. Barrett laid out both deals on my desk and asked what I wanted to do. I looked at the papers describing decades of prison time for two people I once loved and felt nothing except tired. Accepting the deals meant no trial, no public testimony, no media circus watching me describe 4 months of abuse. It meant certainty instead of risk, and after everything I'd endured, I wanted certainty more than I wanted revenge. I signed the acceptance documents for both deals, and Barrett filed them with the court that afternoon. Crispin called an hour later confirming both Elena and Rick accepted the terms, and sentencing was scheduled within the week. The courthouse was packed for Elena's sentencing hearing on a Tuesday morning. I sat in the front row with Barrett while Elena was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. She looked thin and pale, nothing like the woman who used to practice her concerned face in my hospital room mirror. The judge asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement, and I stood up with papers I'd written the night before. I described 4 months of systematic abuse while completely helpless, watching my wife conduct affairs in my bed and plan my murder. I explained the psychological torture of hearing her discuss injection sites and lethal doses while sitting on my paralyzed legs. The judge listened without expression, while Elena stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. I described the humiliation of being used as a footrest by strangers she brought home, the wine she deliberately spilled on my face, the photos she took of my helplessness for her private collection. When I finished, the judge acknowledged that my deception was legally questionable, but understandable given the circumstances. She sentenced Elena to 25 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years, and bailiffs led her away while she finally looked at me with empty eyes. Rick's sentencing happened 3 days later in the same courtroom. His parents sat across the aisle and his mother glared at me the entire hearing. Rick looked worse than Elena, like he'd lost 20 pounds and hadn't slept since his arrest. The judge asked if I wanted to give another statement, and I stood up with different papers. I described 30 years of friendship destroyed by greed and betrayal, watching my best friend since age 12 choose billions over loyalty. I explained the specific pain of his affair with Elena in my bed while I lay paralyzed 2 feet away, listening to them plan my death and discuss their baby inheriting my empire. Rick cried openly while I spoke, but I felt no sympathy because he made every choice that led to this moment. The judge sentenced him to 15 years with possibility of parole after 10, and Rick was remanded to state prison immediately. His mother screamed that I was destroying families, and his father had to restrain her from rushing the barrier. I left through the back exit with Barrett, while Rick's parents shouted accusations in the hallway. The divorce was finalized within days of Elena's sentencing. Barrett filed emergency motions to invalidate the marriage based on fraud and criminal conduct, and the judge approved everything without contest. Elena got nothing from me. No settlement, no alimony, no access to any accounts or assets. Melissa recovered 39 of the 43 million Elena stole, though 4 million disappeared into cryptocurrency that was likely gone forever. Barrett said we'd keep pursuing the missing funds, but I told him to let it go because I was done chasing Elena's theft. The marriage was invalidated like it never existed, which should have felt like victory, but instead felt hollow. 3 months into her sentence, Elena lost the baby, according to reports Barrett received from prison officials. She had a miscarriage in her cell and spent 2 days in the prison medical unit before returning to general population. Barrett asked if I wanted details, and I said no because the baby was never mine and wasn't my concern. The whole situation destroyed something in me I couldn't get back, and no amount of legal victories or prison sentences would restore what Elena took during those 4 months. Layla suggested I take an extended vacation to process everything. She said the company would survive without me for a while, and I needed distance from the media coverage that continued despite the sentencing. I booked 2 months traveling alone through places where nobody knew my story. I started in Iceland, where the landscape was empty and cold, then moved to small villages in Japan, where language barriers meant no conversations about my life. I hiked mountains in New Zealand and sat on beaches in Thailand watching waves while trying to remember who I was before the deception. The anonymity helped me breathe, without wondering if people were judging my choices or pitying my victimization. I met other travelers who asked basic questions about where I was from and what I did, and I gave simple answers that didn't include paralysis or murder plots. But even in those quiet moments, I realized I could never fully return to the person I was before Elena. The experience changed something fundamental in how I saw people and relationships, and no amount of distance would erase those 4 months. I returned home after 2 months and began rebuilding my life with new security protocols. Irving installed additional cameras throughout my properties and updated all access codes and security clearances. Every person who entered my home or office went through enhanced background checks, and I required multiple levels of approval for anyone new joining my inner circle. The protocols made every interaction exhausting, because I was constantly evaluating people's motives and watching for signs of deception. Irving sat me down after the first week and suggested I see fewer people and trust my instincts more. But I realized my instincts failed me completely when I married Elena, so trusting them now felt impossible. I hired additional security staff and established new procedures for monitoring communications and financial transactions. The measures were probably excessive, but I needed them to feel safe in my own life, and nobody questioned my paranoia after what I'd endured. My mother and I established new boundaries in our relationship. The deception created an intimacy through shared trauma that neither of us wanted or knew how to handle. She'd watched Elena abuse me for 4 months while pretending to be a concerned mother-in-law, and that experience bonded us in ways that felt uncomfortable. We used to have weekly dinners at her house where we'd talk about business and family, but after the sentencing, those dinners became strained and awkward. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd say fine, and we'd both know I was lying, but neither of us wanted to dig deeper. After a month of forced conversations, I suggested we change our weekly dinners to monthly check-ins instead. She looked relieved when I said it, and we both acknowledged that we needed space to process what we endured together. The new arrangement worked better because we could be supportive without drowning in shared trauma every week. The company thrived despite my personal struggles. My executive team proved they could operate independently during my absence, making major decisions and closing significant deals without my direct involvement. I'd built the company to run efficiently, but never realized how well it functioned until I was gone for months. Layla coordinated everything during the deception and continued managing operations during my recovery, and I recognized her loyalty was worth more than any salary could reflect. I promoted her to partner and gave her significant equity in the company, making her the first non-family member to hold ownership stake. She cried when I told her, saying she never expected recognition for just doing her job, but I explained that her job during those 4 months was protecting my life and sanity, and that loyalty deserved permanent acknowledgement. The partnership changed our working relationship, making her a true equal in company decisions rather than just a trusted assistant. 6 months after Elena's sentencing, I started dating again. My therapist suggested it was time to test whether I could be vulnerable with someone new, even though the fear of being fooled again made the idea terrifying. I met someone at a charity event who didn't know my story and seemed genuinely interested in conversation rather than my wealth. We went on 3 dates before I told her about Elena and the 4 months of deception, and she listened without judgment or pity. But even as we continued dating, I struggled with constant paranoia about her motives and intentions. I'd catch myself analyzing her word choices and watching for inconsistencies in her stories. I hired a private investigator to run a background check without telling her, then felt guilty about the invasion of privacy. The therapist helped me understand that not everyone was Elena, and most people were decent and honest. But the fear that I could be fooled again made vulnerability nearly impossible, and I sabotaged the relationship after 2 months by pushing her away with my constant suspicion. 8 months after Elena's sentencing, I sat in Barrett's office signing papers to establish the foundation. The legal documents took 3 hours to review, and my hand cramped from writing my signature 47 times across incorporation papers and tax filings. Layla found office space in downtown San Francisco, a building with accessible entrances and meeting rooms designed for people who needed safety and privacy. We hired 6 staff members who understood trauma because they'd lived through it themselves, survivors who could look clients in the eye and mean it when they said things would get better. The foundation offered legal aid, financial counseling, emergency housing funds, and therapy referrals to anyone trapped in dangerous relationships. I transferred $5 million from my personal accounts to get started and committed to matching donations, dollar for dollar. The work felt important in ways my business never had, helping people who couldn't hire 50 actors and security teams to protect themselves. We opened in October and had 37 clients by December, mostly women, but some men too, all carrying stories of manipulation and financial control that sounded familiar. I spent 2 days a week at the foundation office, meeting with clients and reviewing cases, and the work exhausted me in ways that felt productive instead of draining. One woman cried when we paid her security deposit for a new apartment away from her husband, and I understood that my 4 months of hell had purchased the ability to change her life. The foundation gave me purpose beyond accumulating wealth and helped me process my own victimization by preventing others from experiencing the same thing. By spring, we'd helped 83 people escape dangerous situations and rebuild their financial security. Rick's parents sent a letter through Barrett's office in March, 6 months after their son went to prison. The envelope sat on my desk for 2 weeks before I opened it, because seeing their names made my stomach hurt. His mother wrote 3 pages in careful handwriting, explaining they'd spent months trying to understand how their son became someone capable of conspiracy to murder. She admitted they'd always known Rick envied my success, but never imagined that envy could twist into something murderous. His father added a paragraph accepting responsibility for not teaching Rick better values, for raising a son who saw friendship as transactional and wealth as the only measure of worth. They acknowledged that Rick's choices destroyed a friendship that dated back to middle school, and they understood if I never wanted contact with their family again. The letter felt genuine, but I couldn't bring myself to respond because the wound of Rick's betrayal still felt too fresh. I filed the letter in my desk drawer and told Barrett to inform them I appreciated the gesture, but needed more time. The therapist said my inability to respond was normal and healthy, that I didn't owe Rick's parents forgiveness or closure just because they asked for it. Some wounds take years to heal, and forcing premature reconciliation only reopens them. 1 year after the vow renewal confrontation, the therapist suggested I visit Elena in prison to gain closure. I fought the idea for 3 weeks because seeing her face again felt dangerous, like giving her another opportunity to manipulate me. But the therapist explained that confronting her in a controlled environment where she had no power might help me process the trauma and move forward. Barrett arranged the visit through the warden, and I drove to the women's facility on a Tuesday morning with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Security processed me through metal detectors and searched my belongings before escorting me to a visiting room with plastic chairs and vending machines. Elena walked in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame because she'd lost 20 pounds in prison. Her face looked hollow and broken, dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She sat across from me and immediately started crying, reaching for my hands across the table until the guard told her no physical contact. She said she never meant to actually kill me, that she was just fantasizing about being free and didn't understand how serious her planning had become. I watched her perform remorse the same way she'd performed grief during my paralysis, and I saw through the manipulation immediately. She claimed the pregnancy loss devastated her and made her realize how wrong she'd been, but her eyes stayed calculating even while tears ran down her face. I listened for exactly 10 minutes without saying a word, then stood up and walked out while she called my name. The guard escorted me back through security, and I drove home feeling nothing but relief that she was contained behind razor wire and concrete. The therapist was right about closure. Seeing Elena powerless and desperate confirmed that I'd escaped something that would have eventually destroyed me, and I stopped having nightmares about her within a month. I sold the Napa estate in June because I couldn't separate the property from the memories of that day. The real estate agent showed it to 12 potential buyers before a tech entrepreneur from Seattle offered asking price without negotiating. The new owners had no idea about the property's history, and I didn't tell them because that story belonged to me, not the land. The sale netted $42 million after taxes and fees, and I immediately transferred $30 million to the foundation's endowment fund. The remaining $12 million went to establishing scholarships for children of incarcerated parents, kids who didn't choose their situations but suffered the consequences anyway. Barrett handled all the paperwork, and the estate transferred ownership in August. I never went back to see it again because some places become permanent crime scenes in your memory, regardless of what happens there afterward. The foundation staff threw a small celebration when the endowment cleared because $30 million meant we could expand services and help hundreds more people. Melissa called me into her office in September with information that made Elena's betrayal somehow less personal. Her forensic team had been tracking Elena's digital footprint and discovered correspondence with 2 other wealthy men during our marriage. Elena had been running similar long-term manipulation schemes with both of them, sending flirty messages and discussing their finances while building backup plans in case I didn't work out. One man was a real estate developer in Los Angeles who she'd met at a charity event. The other was a venture capitalist in New York who she'd connected with through social media. Both men had significant wealth, and both had been receiving the same calculated attention Elena gave me in our early relationship. Melissa showed me message threads where Elena researched their assets and discussed marriage prospects, treating relationships like investment portfolios with diversified holdings. The revelation that I was just one of several targets made the betrayal feel less like a personal failure and easier to process. Elena hadn't chosen me specifically because of some flaw she detected. She'd been running a numbers game, manipulating multiple wealthy men simultaneously until one of them worked out. The therapist helped me understand this meant Elena's deception wasn't about me at all, just about opportunity and resources. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage to Elena, people I'd drifted away from because she always had reasons why we should skip their events. Rem from college invited me to his daughter's birthday party, and I actually went, spending an afternoon with people who remembered me before the wealth and the drama. Sarah from my first startup threw a dinner party and seated me next to normal people who asked about my work without knowing my net worth. Both Rem and Sarah admitted over drinks that they never liked Elena, but couldn't articulate why. Rem said she always seemed to be performing rather than participating, watching everyone like she was taking notes. Sarah mentioned that Elena asked too many questions about finances and assets, conversations that felt like interviews rather than friendly interest. Their honesty about sensing something wrong made me feel less foolish for missing the signs, though I still struggled with self-blame. The therapist said my friends saw Elena from the outside, while I experienced her calculated intimacy, and those perspectives revealed different things. I couldn't have known what they sensed, because Elena showed me a completely different person, and that deception was intentional and skilled. My weekly therapy sessions in October focused on understanding what Elena actually was, rather than why she targeted me. The therapist explained that Elena likely had antisocial personality disorder, commonly called sociopathy, which meant she saw people as resources to exploit rather than humans with feelings. Sociopaths are skilled at mimicking normal emotions and building relationships based on what others want to see, but they lack genuine empathy or connection. No amount of vigilance would have revealed Elena's true nature without the extreme circumstances of the deception, because she was performing a character specifically designed to fool me. The therapist showed me research on financial predators and manipulative relationships, and Elena's behavior matched the patterns perfectly. She'd studied me, identified what I wanted in a partner, and became that person until she had access to resources worth stealing. The realization didn't erase my trust issues, but helped me stop blaming myself for being fooled. Even trained professionals struggle to identify sociopaths because the manipulation is so sophisticated and convincing. Understanding Elena as a predator rather than a failed partner shifted something in my recovery. 2 years after the confrontation, I met someone at the Foundation's annual fundraising gala. She ran a nonprofit supporting domestic violence survivors and knew my whole story because the Foundation's work had been covered extensively in nonprofit circles. We talked for an hour about trauma-informed care and funding challenges, and she never once asked about my wealth or the details of Elena's crimes. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd survived an abusive marriage herself, which meant she understood hypervigilance and trust issues without taking them personally. We went on 3 dates before I asked Barrett to run a complete background check, and Jennifer laughed when I told her instead of being offended. She said she'd probably do the same thing in my position and appreciated that I was honest about my caution coming from trauma, not paranoia. Barrett's investigation found nothing concerning. Jennifer was exactly who she claimed to be, with a decade of nonprofit work and a clean financial history. We dated slowly and carefully, with me constantly monitoring for red flags that never appeared. Jennifer understood that some conversations triggered me and didn't push when I needed space. She met my mother after 6 months, and Layla after 8, both of whom cautiously approved while watching for signs of manipulation. The relationship felt different from Elena because Jennifer never performed or calculated. She got frustrated with me sometimes and said so directly, instead of hiding behind sweet words. She had her own money and career and life that existed completely separate from mine. 5 years after the confrontation, I received notice that Rick was eligible for a parole hearing. Barrett explained I could submit a statement or testify in person about the impact of his crimes. I spent 2 weeks deciding what to say, because part of me wanted Rick to stay in prison forever, while another part remembered the friend he'd been before Elena corrupted him. I chose to testify in person and drove to the correctional facility on a cold November morning. The parole board sat behind a long table, and Rick entered wearing prison blues, looking older and thinner than I remembered. I gave my statement without looking at him, explaining honestly that Rick made terrible choices that destroyed a friendship dating back to childhood. I said he participated in planning my murder and betrayed me in ways that still hurt 5 years later. But I also said the letters he'd sent through attorneys seemed genuinely remorseful, and I believed he understood the magnitude of what he'd done. I told the board I thought Rick deserved a chance at redemption eventually, though I couldn't say when that time would come. The board asked questions about Rick's character before the crimes, and I answered truthfully that he'd been a good friend for most of our lives. Rick was denied parole anyway because of the severity of the conspiracy charges and the calculated nature of his involvement. I left the hearing feeling like I'd tried to do the right thing, even though our friendship was permanently destroyed. Rick would serve at least another 5 years before his next hearing, and I didn't know if I'd testify again when that time came. The foundation grew significantly over 5 years, expanding from 6 staff members to 23 and serving over 800 people annually. We opened satellite offices in 3 cities and partnered with law firms who provided pro bono representation for our clients. The work became my primary focus beyond the company, consuming 30 hours a week of my time and most of my emotional energy. I realized that Elena's betrayal had created purpose I wouldn't have found otherwise, a mission that felt more important than accumulating wealth. The foundation helped hundreds of people escape dangerous relationships and rebuild their financial security, giving them the resources I'd had to protect myself. Each success story felt like reclaiming something Elena tried to take from me, proof that her cruelty couldn't stop me from creating something meaningful. 3 years after Elena's sentencing, I bought a ring and called my mother to arrange a small gathering at her house. Jennifer knew something was happening because I kept checking my phone and acting nervous, but she didn't push for answers. My mother set up her living room with just a few chairs, and Layla arrived early to help arrange flowers. Jennifer walked in expecting a normal dinner and found me standing in the center of the room holding a small velvet box. I got down on one knee and asked if she'd marry me, explaining that I wanted something simple and real instead of the performance Elena had demanded. Jennifer said yes and hugged me, while my mother cried happy tears, and Layla took photos on her phone. The ring was smaller than the one I'd given Elena, because Jennifer had specifically told me months earlier that she didn't want anything flashy or expensive. We sat together on my mother's couch planning a courthouse ceremony for the following month, and I felt relief that this relationship involved actual conversations about what we both wanted, instead of me guessing and performing. The courthouse wedding happened on a Tuesday morning with just my mother, Layla, and Jennifer's sister present as witnesses. We stood in front of a judge who performed a 5-minute ceremony reading standard vows from a binder. Jennifer wore a simple blue dress she already owned, and I wore a suit from my closet. The judge pronounced us married, and we signed papers in an office that smelled like coffee and old carpet. My mother took us to lunch afterward at a restaurant near the courthouse, and we ate sandwiches while discussing completely normal topics like Jennifer's work project and my mother's garden. I realized during that lunch that I felt genuinely happy for the first time since before the car accident happened. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand when she noticed me getting quiet, and she didn't ask what I was thinking about because she already understood that some moments triggered memories I needed to process alone. We went home to the apartment we'd been sharing for 8 months and spent the evening watching television on the couch like any other night. The lack of spectacle felt perfect because our relationship existed in reality instead of performance, and Jennifer never expected me to prove my love through expensive gestures or elaborate displays. A letter arrived from the state prison 3 weeks after our wedding with Elena's name in the return address. I held it for 2 days before opening it, and Jennifer noticed but didn't ask about it until I brought it up myself. The letter was 4 pages of Elena's handwriting explaining that she'd found religion in prison and wanted my forgiveness for everything she'd done. She described attending chapel services and reading religious texts and claimed she finally understood that greed had corrupted her soul. I read the entire letter sitting at my kitchen table while Jennifer made dinner, and I felt absolutely nothing except mild curiosity about whether Elena actually believed what she'd written. The therapist had told me months earlier that forgiveness was for my benefit, not Elena's, and I could choose to let go of anger without needing to reconcile or respond. I put the letter in a drawer and told Jennifer about it over dinner, explaining that I wasn't ready to forgive, but also wasn't consumed by hatred anymore. She listened without offering advice or judgment, just acknowledging that my feelings about Elena were complicated and would probably stay that way. I never responded to the letter, and Elena sent 2 more over the following year that I threw away without opening. Irving called me 6 months later to announce his retirement after 30 years of service with my family and company. We met for lunch at his favorite steakhouse, and he explained that the deception operation had been the culmination of his entire career, the most elaborate security operation he'd ever coordinated. He walked me through details I hadn't known about the operation, like how they'd installed over 200 hidden cameras throughout my properties and maintained a 24-hour monitoring center with rotating shifts. Irving admitted that watching Elena abuse me for 4 months had been harder than any protection detail he'd handled because he couldn't intervene to stop it. We talked about the ethical questions the operation raised, and Irving said he'd do it again because protecting me from murder justified the deception required. He became a mentor figure after retirement, meeting me monthly for lunch to discuss security protocols and life decisions. Irving helped me understand that protecting yourself isn't paranoia when threats are real, and that Elena's betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about trust and verification. His guidance helped me separate reasonable caution from the trust issues that were damaging my new marriage, and I learned to distinguish between protecting assets and protecting relationships. 4 years after the confrontation at the vow renewal, I took inventory of my life and realized I was genuinely happy for the first time in years. My marriage to Jennifer was stable and honest, built on actual communication instead of performance and manipulation. The company continued growing, and I'd promoted several executives who proved they could operate independently without my constant oversight. The foundation had expanded to serve over 1,000 people annually, with offices in 5 cities and partnerships with legal firms across the state. I still carried scars from Elena's betrayal that showed up in moments of doubt or suspicion, but they'd become part of my story instead of defining my entire identity. Jennifer and I hosted my mother for dinner every Sunday, and those evenings felt comfortable and real in ways my life with Elena never had. The foundation work gave me purpose beyond accumulating wealth, and I spent 30 hours weekly focused on helping people escape dangerous relationships. I realized that Elena's cruelty had accidentally created meaning I wouldn't have found otherwise, turning my trauma into something that protected and helped others. The scars remained, but they'd transformed from open wounds into healed tissue that made me stronger and more aware. Jennifer told me she was pregnant on a random Thursday evening while we were doing dishes together after dinner. I felt joy mixed with immediate terror about trusting someone new with that level of vulnerability and dependence. The therapist helped me understand during our next session that parenting would trigger trauma responses related to Elena's fake pregnancy and manipulation, but my awareness of the issues meant I could work through them consciously instead of letting them control my behavior. I spent the pregnancy reading parenting books and attending classes with Jennifer while simultaneously working with Barrett to establish legal protections for our child. The baby arrived 7 months later after a complicated delivery that left me shaking in the hospital waiting room. Holding my daughter for the first time brought overwhelming love mixed with fear about all the ways I could fail or hurt her. Jennifer watched me struggle with those feelings and gave me space to process them without demanding I perform joy or confidence I didn't feel yet. The therapist increased our sessions to twice weekly during the first 3 months of parenting because the sleep deprivation and constant vulnerability triggered panic attacks and intrusive thoughts about Elena's betrayal. I established a trust for my daughter with ironclad protections and multiple oversight mechanisms that Barrett spent 3 months drafting and revising. The trust included provisions preventing any single person from accessing the funds and required approval from 3 separate trustees for major decisions. Jennifer reviewed the documents and understood that my caution came from experience, not lack of trust in her specifically. We actually laughed about the elaborate legal structures protecting our family because the paperwork filled an entire binder and included scenarios that seemed almost paranoid. But I needed those protections to feel secure enough to be present as a father and Jennifer recognized that my trauma responses weren't personal attacks on her character. She signed everything without complaint, and even suggested additional safeguards after reading about cases where parents had stolen from their children's trusts. The legal protections let me relax enough to enjoy moments with my daughter instead of constantly worrying about worst-case scenarios. Barrett joked that my daughter had better asset protection than most corporations, but he also understood why I needed that level of security to function. 5 years after Elena's sentencing, I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't had nightmares about being paralyzed and unable to move in over 2 weeks. The dreams had been recurring since the confrontation, always featuring me actually paralyzed while Elena approached with the syringe, and I couldn't speak or move to stop her. I mentioned the change to my therapist during our weekly session, and she explained that this represented genuine healing and integration of the trauma. My brain had finally processed what happened enough to stop replaying it during sleep as a threat requiring constant vigilance. The nightmares had been decreasing in frequency over the previous year, but this marked the first extended period without them since the vow renewal. I still had occasional anxiety about trust and betrayal, but the visceral terror of helplessness had faded into something more manageable. The therapist warned me that anniversaries and triggers might bring the dreams back temporarily, but the overall trajectory showed real progress toward recovery. Jennifer noticed I was sleeping better and mentioned that I'd stopped talking in my sleep and thrashing around during the night. The improvement in sleep quality helped everything else feel more manageable, and I had more energy for work and parenting. The foundation hosted its first annual gala 18 months later, and I decided to share my story publicly for the first time. Layla had been pushing me to use my experience for fundraising and awareness, but I'd resisted because the vulnerability felt terrifying. Jennifer encouraged me by pointing out that hundreds of people had already benefited from the foundation, and my story could help even more. I worked with a speaking coach for 2 months to prepare remarks that explained what happened without sensationalizing or performing trauma. The gala brought together 300 donors and supporters in a hotel ballroom decorated with foundation materials and survivor testimonials. I stood at the podium and told the story of pretending to be paralyzed to catch Elena planning my murder, explaining how that experience taught me about financial abuse and exploitation in relationships. The room stayed completely silent while I spoke, and several people were crying by the time I finished. The vulnerability felt excruciating, but the response was overwhelmingly supportive, with dozens of people approaching me afterward to share their own experiences or thank me for speaking openly. We raised significant funds that night to expand services and open 2 additional offices. Jennifer stood beside me throughout the evening and squeezed my hand when I started shaking after the speech. Sharing my story publicly felt like reclaiming it from Elena and transforming private trauma into public good. Barrett contacted me 6 months later with news that Elena was eligible for parole in 15 years, and I'd have the opportunity to testify at her hearing. Jennifer asked if I'd oppose her release, and I realized I genuinely didn't know yet how I'd feel in 15 years. Part of me wanted Elena to stay in prison forever as punishment for what she'd done, but another part wondered if keeping her imprisoned after she'd served significant time was really about justice, or just revenge. The therapist helped me understand that I had 15 years to figure out whether revenge or mercy served me better, and my feelings would probably evolve as I continued healing. Jennifer supported whatever decision I'd eventually make, but encouraged me to stay open to the possibility that forgiveness might benefit me more than continued anger. I filed paperwork preserving my right to testify at the parole hearing, while acknowledging I might choose not to exercise that right when the time came. Elena would serve at least 15 more years regardless of my testimony because of the severity of her crimes and her behavior in prison. The knowledge that I had time to decide felt freeing because I didn't need to commit to revenge or forgiveness immediately. I could continue healing and building my life while leaving that decision open for future consideration when I had more perspective and distance from the trauma. 6 years after the vow renewal confrontation, I wake up in my new house with sunlight coming through windows that face a garden my wife planted last spring. She's already downstairs making breakfast, and I hear our daughter laughing at something, probably the dog stealing food off the counter again. I get dressed and head down to find them both covered in flour from attempting pancakes, and my wife kisses me without checking her reflection first or calculating how the moment looks to anyone watching. The foundation office opens in an hour, and I need to review the quarterly report showing we helped 200 families escape dangerous relationships this year, twice as many as last year. My company stock hit record highs last month, and the executive team I built runs operations so smoothly, I only work 3 days a week now, spending the rest of my time with family and foundation work. The therapy sessions dropped to once a month 2 years ago because the nightmares finally stopped, and I can sleep through the night without checking security cameras. My daughter runs up and shows me a drawing she made of our family, just stick figures holding hands, and I realize she'll never know about Elena or the 4 months I spent pretending to be paralyzed while my wife planned my murder. The elaborate deception protected my wealth and exposed Elena's true nature, but it cost me 4 months of systematic abuse and years of recovery that changed fundamental parts of who I am. I've made peace with that trade-off because the alternative was dying at my vow renewal or spending my life with someone who saw me as a resource to exploit rather than a person to love. Later that evening, I stand in our living room watching my wife help our daughter with homework, while Layla texts about tomorrow's foundation gala, and my mother calls to confirm Sunday dinner plans. These people have proven their loyalty through years of honest relationship, showing up consistently without performing devotion or calculating what they can extract from me. Elena's betrayal taught me the difference between someone who practices concerned faces in mirrors and someone who actually gives a shit when you're struggling. The lesson cost more than I wanted to pay. 4 months of humiliation and years of therapy and trust issues that still surface when I meet new people. But it gave me the wisdom to recognize authentic love when I found it, to build a life with people who chose me for reasons beyond my bank account, to create something worth protecting that doesn't require security cameras and paid actors to verify its reality. I'm finally grateful for both the warning Elena provided and the survival that let me build this instead. And that's the full wrap-up. I love when small stories end up carrying something you can actually use. If this one did that, then it was worth sharing.